Hi, I'm Corey Driver, and this is Moving Forward. So a very exciting week. We are in Genesis 1 and Matthew 28, and we're talking about God's intentional creating, filling, and dwelling. God living with us intentionally after making space for us. So the way that I kind of come about this this week is my father-in-law, my brother-in-law's cousin, hello, Mr. Matt, and I and various others worked on making some space in our basement. So we had a really huge open basement, and my wife, Sarah, needed a space for working for her office. She runs a DEI business and has a ministry of justice instruction for congregations, justicedriver.com, free plug. And she needs space to work on that. And we didn't have an office space for her otherwise. So we came together and made a space. Some put up walls, put insulation in so it would be very quiet, ran electrical conduit, painted, that was mostly me. And so we got this space, and then we got this huge desk as a gift from somebody at the congregation we attend, and it's huge in several parts. So I carried that downstairs and assembled it, and then finally, it was ready, ish, right? The space was there. The desk was there, some bookshelves were there, but Sarah had to inhabit it, right? And Sarah had to move in and move her stuff in and, figure out how to do her work there. And it's just so exciting. And I know my father-in-law and I were just so excited to see, the space is made, but what's Sarah going to do with it? What decorations is she going to put up? The plants, I wasn't expecting the plants. There's lots of plants in the basement, and they're living, which is amazing to me with, not plant keeping alive skills. But Sarah moved in, and she's making it happen, and it's just really fun to watch. And I wonder if that fun and delight at seeing what happens with space prepared and ongoing indwelling of space. I have a little desk on the other side of Sarah's desk downstairs, so I get to keep seeing what's going on. I wonder if that's what God feels in these passages, and we will talk about why that might be the case. So as Genesis 1 begins, we do not have the creation of everything, or the beginning of creation. That happens before the text. Here's why. Settle in for a little bit of nerdery. The opening words of Genesis, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz. The beginning, Bereshit, is in construct. It's part of a phrase. It's smichut for those playing the at-home game. So it is not grammatically a discrete phrase. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. No, grammatically, that is not what the Hebrew is saying. It's not Berishonah, it's Bereshit, as Rashi tells us. So a better translation would be, at the beginning of God's creating of the heavens and earth, the earth was formless and void. Right? It is an introductory statement to tell us where we're at. So the NRSV UE actually does this really nicely. When God began creating the heavens and earth, right? The earth was not yet fully formed. So it's important to know right off the bat that stuff already exists. We do not have creation ex nihilo, creation from nothing, in Genesis 1. That simply isn't the case. And I can prove it to you if you read the second verse. The earth is but isn't quite, right? There's a earth-like place that isn't fully formed, right? The earth is tohu vavohu, right? It is not formed. It's wild. It is maybe somehow a pre-creation ruin. It's not made yet, but the idea of earth and shape for earth and like ingredients of earth already exist, right? There is earth. It's just tohu vavohu. There is a pre-light darkness. So light hasn't been created yet. So darkness is there on the face of the waters. So there's some sort of like position to darkness. There's some like placeness. There's a spiritual atmosphere that is moving, hovering, merahefet, right? Vibrating, right? And so you can say the spirit, you can say a wind from God, you can combine it to say a windy spirit. Various translations do this thing. But again, above the waters, the spirit, the wind is moving, vibrating, I think is probably the best translation of the verb. And then there are the waters themselves, right? How did these waters get to be? Where do these waters come from? Who created these waters? Well, we think we know that one. But what is the story of the waters? Well, we don't know, right? That's not included in the text. At the beginning of God's creating of the heavens and earth, the earth is like not fully formed yet. There is a darkness that sits on top of the waters. What's underneath the waters? It's hard to say. There is a spiritual atmosphere, blowing, moving, vibrating. And then there's the waters themselves. Is this the beginning of creation? Or has creation already begun? These things exist right off the gate. There is not nothing, and then God speaks creation of light. There's a bunch of stuff, and then God speaks creation of light. So we have to see that God has been planning and creating before the beginning of the text. God prepares and makes space. Before the earth was separated from the waters, God makes this space and plan and maybe material for earth. Before the sun, moon, and stars were created on the fourth day, God makes a space for those things on the second day. Before the sea creatures and flying things are created on the fifth day, God makes space and food for them on the third day. In the same fashion, on the sixth day, when the land animals, including humans, are made, God has already made space and food for them on the third day. God has prepared a space and then fills it and then enjoys it. God keeps seeing that it's good. God is not creating and saying, yeah, done, whatever, and walking away. But God is perceiving. God sees and labels. A lot of times we will talk about the verbs of creation. God says, let there be light. God saw the light, that it was good. God separated the light from darkness, and God specifies this is day and this is night, right? The four verbs of creation, cleverly in English, 4S verbs, to say, see, separate, and specify. Right. And so God is planning and acting before things are created in order to make space and to have an area to fill with creation. Why is this important? It is important because it tells us something about God. It's an invitation to do theology, right? Genesis 1:1 is not the creation of all things. Stuff already exists right from the very beginning, right? At the beginning of God's creation of the heavens and earth. Well, what else has God created? Well, God has created water that is neither heaven nor earth. So what was that beginning? What was going on then? It is an invitation to peek behind the curtain and to know something about God. God is doing stuff that we're simply not privy to, right? But it is an invitation. It's romance. It is like ooh, I've got other stuff going on, and I'm going to fill you in on part of it, but part of it will remain mysterious. This is the language of poetry and lovers, right? This is like, ooh, there's more than meets the eye. There's something remaining to be seen or understood. God, like any artist, is leaving something out. Right? It is a space for longing and desire. And it is, again, like an artist. No artist just, boom, starts, right? You make space. You gather materials. You maybe have a plan. Maybe you just are filled with inspiration. But even then, there is preparation and planning and training and formation as an artist. This is the creation account, that there is space ready to be filled because God has made space. Perhaps God has made space within God's self. If we cling to a creation ex nihilo model, not here in Genesis 1, but maybe the prequel, right, before the water and the spiritual atmosphere and the darkness and the earth void space, maybe there was nothing other than God. And so God has to, as the Kabbalists will tell us, make space within God's self. God has to essentially, take it if you like it, create a womb within God's self, a negative space for God to create within, right? If God is all that is, God has to make space for waters and earth void and whatever. So God prepares, God makes a space, God partially fills that space with water, and then the vault of the sky, and then dry land, and then animals in the sky and in the water and in the dry land, heavenly bodies, the sun, moon, and stars, right? And so you see God enjoying this process of making space and then filling that space and preparing that space for life. And God is by no means absent. God is delightedly and delightfully present. I tell you that to tell you this. In Matthew 28, we have almost the same process of Jesus preparing a space, filling it, and then being delightfully present as creation is ongoing. So a resurrected Jesus calls the disciples and then meets them at a mountain in Galilee, right? Go to the mountain in Galilee and I'll meet you there. And what happens? The disciples go, many of them are of two minds, right? They kind of want to worship, but they kind of aren't sure if they're supposed to worship or don't want to. And while they are thinking, Jesus comes to them. Jesus fills in the space between himself and the disciples and is present with them. Then Jesus specifically echoes the language of creation. All authority in heaven and on earth, right? Remember the creations of heaven and earth has been given to him. Therefore, the disciples are to do a couple things. They are to baptize all the nations in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And they are to teach people to cling to Jesus's commandments. Now, I feel like tereo, that verb, you'd probably want to translate as like guard or scrupulously follow rather than simply follow or obey. It's got a sense of like guarding. So this is not just like, do commandments when you think or whatever. This is like guarding or holding on to tightly, not T-O-O tightly, T-O, holding on to tightly. Jesus has prepared a place and a role for disciples to inhabit, that of, let's say, sacramentologists, those doing the means of grace, right? Like baptizing people, and as master teachers, to cling to Jesus's commandments in a way that necessarily leads to fulfillment of those commandments. Jesus really cared that people would do what he said, and that's why, he had his whole life ministry and insists again and again across the Gospels that if you love me, do my commandments or cling to my commandments. That really matters and isn't optional for Jesus's followers. And then Jesus goes ahead, as we've read in previous weeks, to prepare a place for us. Jesus does the work of God the Father in creation by preparing a place and a role for folks to inhabit, goes ahead, does the work ahead of time, necessarily making space for folks to thrive in. I, Jesus, am making a space for you to be my disciples in, right? Go, baptize, teach, and cling to my commandments, right? That is the preparation work that Jesus calls us into inhabit. So very much in the same way that God makes a space for the creation of earth and then makes a space for life forms to inhabit by separating earth from water, Jesus makes a space for disciples to inhabit by, giving us instruction with water, baptize, and then giving us commandments to cling to and to teach. Jesus is echoing the work of creation here in preparing and then calling folks to inhabit and then dwelling with us delightedly and delightfully, right? We see this echo, and it is not accidental that God prepares a space and then fills it and then delights in it. Jesus similarly prepares a space and a role, calls us to fill it, and then delights in it.